Hey, 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 everybody. Let's make sure we're all good. There we go. Hi, welcome to my surprise live stream. Sort of surprise. I was sort of said I was going to do this earlier. Now, I know, wanted to make this that metering video. Didn't quite work out for me timing-wise with everything this week. But I didn't want to go off to Portland this weekend and not have anything for you guys for the whole weekend and the whole time here, because I'm getting on a jet plane tomorrow. Let's go ahead and throw up the chat on the screen here. Hey, guys. I'm getting on a plane early tomorrow morning, and I'm flying out to Portland. And so I thought, well, let's go ahead and take a look at this Portland conference and what I'm going to be talking about. People have asked me if I'm going to be recording my presentation there. I am not, because it's going to be kind of interactive with the audience, and we're not recording the audience for what I think are obvious reasons. At a cult recovery conference, you don't take a lot of pictures of the audience members who are there to recover. And not interested in publicity, right? And that kind of thing. Some of them still under the radar, in fact. And not just Scientology, other groups as well. So anyway, that's why I won't be doing that. So I thought instead I would talk a little bit today about the conference and talk a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about. So I thought that might be kind of interesting for people, maybe. Hopefully, which is why I thought I'd just go live and go ahead and do this. So thanks for joining me for this. I appreciate it. You have a lot of choices on YouTube as to where you spend your time, and I appreciate you coming and spending your time here with me. I'm sure I will probably be attending some other sessions. In fact, let me first start off this whole thing with a little, for anybody who doesn't know, what's happening or what I'm doing. Let me actually throw this up on the screen here. And this is I just pulled this off the website. The site itself where you can find out about this is safeportland.org. All one word, no hyphens or underlines or anything, just safeportland.org. And the conference page here is under the conference tab on the Safe Portland website. And it's called Not Alone, a conference for survivors and helping professionals. Hear from helping professionals and connect with other survivors. Together, we can overcome the trauma of cults and high control groups or relationships. And this SAFE is Spiritual Abuse Forum for Education. That's what it's actually an acronym. And they're the ones who are actually putting on the conference and do regular meetups in Portland for those who have left or are considering leaving high control or high demand groups. Now here they say specifically leaving high demand religious groups, although I'm pretty sure that if you were in a non-religious cult or high control group, they would welcome you with open arms, and I'm sure you would find a lot of support and help there. But that's kind of how they're focusing. And for those with friends and loved ones who are members of such groups, because sometimes conference attendees are not just survivors themselves, but are people who are trying to figure out how to get people out of their friends, their family, or how to deal with them and that kind of thing. There's a lot to know, and helping somebody out of a situation like that, being a friend to somebody who is in a situation like that, is incredibly difficult. It's really a strain on the relationship in a lot of ways, because there's trust issues, loyalty issues, truth issues, what you can and can't say. You don't want to manipulate them, but they're probably trying to manipulate you. And, it's just all this stuff you got to do. Anyway, I'm just literally jumping right into it here with people still coming on board. So anyway, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here. So this Portland conference is basically about the same kind of stuff and is offering the same kind of support in a structured, formatted way that I do with my consultations. As I always say, I'm not a licensed therapist, and I'm not pretending to be. There are people out there who present as though I'm pretending to be, and I'm not. I never ever said that. But I do offer help and assistance to people, and advice and direction, and I'm happy to do that. And I'm not bad at it, and I've helped a lot of people. So I'm going to go meet with other people at this conference who do that exact same thing, and they're going to be presenting as well. And I'm also going to get a chance to finally meet in person some of the people that I did the Salford University program on coercive control. That program is the other graduates from that are also going to be there and presenting. So it's really going to be a nice little alumni get together as well in some ways. According to the conference website here, I'm referring to people like Diana Levy, Jennifer French Tomasic, Aaron Falconer, and others. There are psychotherapists and trainers and authors and therapists and cult specialists and a lot of people. Ashlyn Hilliard is one of the co-organizers. Also Kent Berntner. Anyway, it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. There will be multiple tracks operating all at the same time. So I think there's 3 different rooms where presentations are going to be happening throughout the day. The conference itself is the one day on May 11th. This Saturday is what it's going to be. Okay, and you can go to that site if you want to get more specific information. Let's go ahead and get back over to the chat here. Oh, hey, thank you for those gifted memberships. How nice. Thank you, Debbie M, for that. Very, very appreciated. Always love the support. Okay. So that's the conference. That's what we're going to be. Oh, hey, Holly. Excellent. So that's what the conference is going to be about. And if you're in Portland or thereabouts, it's $45 for registration if you want to go. By the way, you can still sign up and go. So if you're in the area or anything and you want to meet me, meet other people, see what's going on there, it'd be great. So you can sign up for that. All right. So now the other thing I wanted to do today was kind of walk through, and I wanted to also, like I'm going to be doing in Portland, I'm actually a little curious about your feedback and sort of interaction on this topic of cult recovery and the sort of the elements of cult recovery. I've titled this video today. What am I talking about? Well, I'm not somebody who is ever trying to put myself on some kind of pedestal or be some kind of final authority figure when it comes to how to go about recovering from a cult experience. I'm some dude who grew up in Scientology, had a lot of experiences in it, mostly negative. 27 years of that. Working for the church, being abused by the church, trying my best to forward the mission of Scientology as a Scientologist and as a Sea Org member, and believing wholeheartedly in the goals and purposes of it, and then realizing that those were fake, false goals, that they weren't true, that Scientology wasn't about making the world a place without criminality, war, insanity, that Scientology was not about the open communication, the expression of your free will and that sort of thing, that it was actually the exact opposite of that. And the realizations that come, the epiphanies, the like, wait a minute, the what? Those are slow to come. They're slow. They roll out, at the speed with which your mind can basically accept them. And so the journey out of a cult headspace, a belief system, a moral foundation, a worldview, is hard. It's slow. It's a process. And that process has lots of emotional and real world ups and downs connected with it. There's a lot of struggling. There's a lot of sorting things out and rethinking your whole, perspective on stuff. And I got out of Scientology in 2012. I got really out, mentally out, and kicked out in 2013, right? 11 years ago. And I've spent almost every single day since then trying to learn what the hell happened to me, and then trying to figure out how to communicate it to other people, and then trying to figure out how to get over it, and then trying to figure out how to help other people get over it. As far as I'm concerned, that's recovery. It's not, there's no certificate at the end of this road. There's no, group of people who are going to acknowledge your accomplishment. It's just continuing to live your life away from that cult model, away from that influence, and trying to figure out who you are and what it's all about anyway, and what your life should be and what it was, and how that's not what it should have been, and how you were a lot of other people's ideas and expectations and obligations and responsibilities were laid over the top of you, that they were never really yours, but they were made to be yours, these values and ideas and duties and responsibilities that the cult assigns you. And cults are really good at doing that. And making you feel real guilty about it, and making you feel really shameful that you're not doing enough, and that you're not doing more, and that you can't somehow give more of yourself to the cause. This is what being in a cult is. And the way that you are forced to go about giving of yourself may be through work, it may be through sex, it may be through money, it may be through just time, just giving your volunteer hours or whatever. It can manifest or show itself in lots and lots of different ways. But there's always undue influence. There's always pressure and obligation and shame and blame and guilt, and a lot of negativity laid over it. But at the surface, everyone's so happy. Everyone is so happy to be there. Everybody is so enamored with the group. And cults are always groups, right? It's never just you sitting there all by yourself. It's a group thing, and there's a group dynamic to it that can't be ignored. Recovery isn't just about finding your own place in the world. It's about figuring out yourself in relation to other people too, and where you slot in, and how you should slot in, and how you should get along with other people. Oh, thank you very much for that super chat, Maria. Appreciate that. So those are the things that I have addressed or looked at over all these years. And I thought, been running this channel, trying my best to give people advice and help with this. So where does this all go to after 10 years, right, of working on this stuff all this time? Where do we go with this? Well, I put a list together. And I thought, why don't I just go over some of these things on this list here and see what you guys think, and what your thoughts and feelings are about these issues, about these topics. Because when I started thinking about how to talk about cult recovery there's an awful lot of people who come out of cults who are more than happy to tell you how to live your life or how to do whatever it is you're supposed to be doing or want to do. And they're very, very happy to continue, like they did in the cult, to tell you what's right and wrong about you and what's good and bad about you and that kind of thing, right? There's a lot, in other words, there's an awful lot of judgment that happens in cults. And there's, guess what? There's an awful lot of judgment that happens outside of cults because that's what people do. So the cult judgments, though, can be particularly harsh because of all those factors I was just talking about. You know, some Joe walks up to you on the street and tells you something about yourself. You can just blow them off. No big deal. But when your cult leader is doing that, or his lieutenants, or her, enforcers or enablers or whatever are coming at you, and you're feeling pressured because you're part of this group and membership is important to you, and maintaining your good standing is important to you, then you suddenly realize that you've got hoops to jump through. And it's how high, sir, right? Ooh, oh, my goodness. And that's the Sea Org. That's Scientology, 100%. So there's this sort of series of hoops you got to jump right back out of. So I'm just going to go through this list of stuff here and it's sort of topic by topic and sort of see what y'all think. Let me throw this on the screen. We'll edit this little line here as we go through. But first thing coming out of a cult, or first thing to address in terms of cult recovery, is always basic needs first. Actually, back up a second here before we even get into that. First, let me say that I think one thing that is true universally for people who are coming out of a coercive situation are the onion layers. The fact that it's going to come off in stages. It's going to come out of you bit by bit, piece by piece. And that fact alone can be incredibly frustrating because it's a slow, sort of progressive, you kind of have to evolve out of it just like you evolved into it. You come into a cult situation like Scientology, they're not force feeding the whole track and implants and trillion years ago events and Xenu. They're not throwing that stuff at you on day one or day two. And they're not throwing thetans at you on day one or day two, really. There's so much that they hold off and they gradually spoon feed you this stuff so that they don't blow you away, right? And have you march right back out the door. So the onion layers concept has been a great analogy for me over all these years. And every time I've shared it or used it with people, they tend to go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, so I want to start with that as far as a basic of cult recovery is that it's not an all or nothing one-time deal. It doesn't work that way. Our minds and brains, same thing, whatever. They just don't. Yeah, here, OBG Foster, I left low-demand Christianity. It took 10 years to shake the feeling that something could read my thoughts. Exactly what I'm talking about. You got it. So, so it just takes a while. That's an important thing to know because it gives you as a cult survivor, it gives you a little bit of grace. It gives you a little bit of time. And you should be giving yourself time through this process. To think it's an all or, snap and pop and let's go and taka, 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 right? These are all Scientology things I used to do, right? Come on, taka, 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 let's go, right? It's all now, now, now. Hurry, hurry, hurry. There's a very crunched time element that goes on in most cults where they are constantly demanding a production or work or results or reactions out of you. They want it all now. It's very instant gratification kind of environment. And cult recovery is not that. It's very much the opposite of that. It's a slow, gradual process. And it's okay that it be that way. It needs to be okay that it be that way, because it is that way whether you want it to be or not. I don't mean to dictate to people how this is going to go, but there are certain principles of this that are just absolutely universally true, and I believe with all my heart that this is one of them. So that's an important thing to know. The other thing about basic needs first is, is kind of understanding a couple other concepts here. Coercive control. What is it? What was done to you? In short, in the shortest way I know how to explain to somebody what happens in a cult, you were isolated, you were manipulated, and you were controlled. Those three things happen to you. And they happen to you over and over and over and over again. And the longer you're there, the more isolated you are, the more manipulated you are, the more brainwashed you are, if you will, the more layers of complete and utter bullshit were laid on top of you as beliefs, as dogma, as ethics, as morals, as how you are to behave. This is dictated to you. This is not so dissimilar, by the way, to, an abusive relationship. Spouses do this to one another. And it's the same three principles. It's isolation, manipulation, and control. It's really easy to understand that. It's almost impossible to see it when you're in the middle of it, though. And that's what's so crazy making about this, is it's become so obvious once you do see it, you can't unsee it. But when you're in the middle of it, when you're in the enamored love phase, when your guru or your leader or the guy you're following is such a charismatic, wonderful, amazing person that you can only see the good in, and you can't really acknowledge that this is a human being with just as many flaws and pitfalls and problems as you or anybody else in the world. When you're in that heady love phase, you can't see any of this for what it is. And there is no one harder to show or convince that they're in a cult than a cult member. It's just really hard. So coming out of that situation, I think it's really important that that coercive control as a concept or as an idea of, mental domination and enslavement is another way of putting it, by the way, if we wanted to use some harder words. This can be difficult, but just understanding that concept alone is a little bit of freedom, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of, oh, wait a minute, maybe I could think about this a little differently, So I think that's important. And it's important also to understand, as one of these basic points, one of these most fundamental of all fundamentals to recovering from a cult, one of the first things that must be said is it's not your fault. You didn't do it to yourself. Somebody did it to you. Predators prey on people. That's what they do. I could pull out DSM-5. I could talk to you about psychiatric diagnoses all day long. None of that's as important as understanding that you were preyed upon. Just like lions eat gazelles, some human being came along and took a chunk out of you. And that's what it is to be in a cult or to be under coercive control. Is it some predatory human being, somebody who lacks a conscience and empathy and believes that other people are basically NPCs in their game, in their world, right? The other people are just tools to be used. That's the predator. And there are there's a laundry list of psychiatric disorders and labels that we can put on such people. But I really think bringing it down to the simple label of a predator does it the justice that it deserves. So that's the natural world. It's not weird or unusual for nature to put things together that way. There's predators and there's prey, right? As Debbie mentions here in the comments, right? And you're going to be one or the other if you don't know and understand how this works, right? I mean, being a human predator is a very unnecessary thing in our modern world in many, many ways. But that's kind of a separate conversation. It's important to the cult recovery aspect of this that you understand that being prey or being, fed upon by some predator isn't your fault. You didn't do something wrong. You didn't have moral failings. You didn't act out in the wrong moment. You didn't do something to deserve what happened to you. Right? Any more than if a lion eats a gazelle, that the gazelle did anything to deserve that. It's not a moral failing that predators prey. That's just what they do. If you don't want to be preyed upon, then you have to understand that principle, and you have to be able to spot predators when they enter into your life. I think fully half the content I've put out has been about how to spot those guys and women. Right? It's men, it's women, it's humans. How they go about preying on you, that's what this is all about, right? So that's real important, though, to get that. And finally, the other thing, as far as basics go here, and it's emerging more and more as a sort of an important thing to know about or be cognizant of, is the multi-generational aspect of it. Oh, O.B.G. Foster, yeah, that's one of the challenges. How do you tell someone who is indoctrinated to believe there's no such thing as a victim that they were a victim? It's a process, and it's a gradual one, right? I lead right away here today, and I will always, I think, lead with, hey, it's not your damn fault. But this is something you're going to have to say over and over again. There's levels of acceptance to this. It's not a one and done, right? Especially in groups like Scientology that eschew victimhood, that say there is no such thing as a victim. A victim mentality is a bad thing to have. How dare you be a victim? In other words, how dare you try to call me out or hold me to account for preying on you, right? That's the whole effort of denying that there are victims or that victimhood is a thing, is to gaslight the hell out of the person into making them think that everything is on them and it was always their fault. That's why it's so foundational in Scientology. Early material, 1952, Hubbard was writing about responsibility means it's all your fault, motherfucker. Right, if I'm going to be really obscene about it, and that's how Hubbard rolled, and people run around in this world with very guilty consciences. They're raised by parents who don't necessarily understand how to teach this stuff. They go into social systems and schools that are all too happy to blame them for the school system's shortcomings and failings. They go into a job situation where there are absolutely predators preying on people, left, right, and center at every level of corporate America, for example. We are surrounded by this blame the victim mentality because people do not like to be held to account for their bad behavior. So it's a constant refrain that you have to keep getting this across to people until they finally sinks into their emotional center. It's not just a matter of teaching people some facts. It's getting it across to them and continuing to do so until they absorb it emotionally. That's a way I'm trying to to describe that. No, I did not ever strike my wife while I was in Scientology. Wow. Okay. So, generational experience, as I was going to get into here. First gen, second gen. There are people who get converted into destructive cults or situations, and then there are people who are raised in them. And these two things are different. They are not the same thing. There is still, I believe, a conversion moment or moments for second-generation members, because not every second-generation member agrees to go along with the show, and many of them, nope, I'm out of here, take off, don't want to have any part of it. they go along with it while they're kids, but as soon as they're adults, right, they hit the eject button. But with those who don't, had a conversion moment. Something happened to convince them this is it, and they need to keep doing it, keep going. They have some motivated reason. There's some hook or, thing that is keeping them in. That's second gen, right? Versus first gen, who bought into it. They were convinced. This is it. This is the bee's knees. This is what I need. L. Ron Hubbard's a genius. This is the guy who figured it out, so I'm going to follow him. And they go along for the ride. And recovery is very, very similar, but let's acknowledge some differences between, the multi-generational versus the non. One way of discussing this is, one way of describing this is the pre-cult personality thing. That there could be, a person who is converted into a cult had a sense of themselves and their morality and their worldview that wasn't ever influenced by the cult, and then they get into the cult, and then they take on all the habits and action patterns and teachings and indoctrination and all that, and they become the cult member version of themselves, which is generally speaking a pretty poor, pretty bad version of you. But it's only a version of you, and that's what you shed, like a snake skin or whatever, when you come out of the cult, right? As a first generation member, you can go right back into who you were before, or you can take the lessons and learn and the experiences of it, and you're a different and better version of yourself coming out of the cult. Second gens don't really have that kind of model to fall back on, especially if their earliest memories of being in the cult, like mine, go all the way back to their childhood, where there is, this sort of pre-cult personality. Well, that model tends to not work so great for second gens. And there's other ways you can think about this stuff that you don't have to fit a round peg into a square hole. This is one of the other basics I wanted to talk about today, is that cult models are a dime a dozen. There's bunches of them. The bite model is very, very far from the only model of cultic behavior and systems of domination and control. There's all kinds of models, right? I've seen very, very complicated ones. I've seen very, very simple ones. The bite model is great because it's simple, easy to remember, and people can kind of walk away with it and go, yeah, okay, now I know something about this. And they do, and it's good to know. But don't think for a second that that's everything there is to know about cults, because it's not. There's a ton of models on this stuff. I mean, I can refer you, for example, to Janja Lalich and her model of bounded choice. That would be another model, right, where the idea is not behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. It's about binding your choices and sticking you on a path that you don't have any control over, and you don't get to have any off-ramp. It's your choices are decided for you, and they are limited in scope. That's another way of very validly thinking about or looking at what it is to be in a cult. Okay, so yeah, exactly. If they showed you everything on day one, you'd be like, you guys are whack. I'm getting the hell out of here, right? Xenu Shmenu. Okay, so that's your multi-generational experience. It's just something I wanted to note. See, every one of the topics that I'm going to go over today pretty much could have its own book, and in fact does. There's books on these topics. But I just wanted to kind of cover them as elements of recovery. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into that. Now, basic needs first. Here's the final thing on that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is something that is important to know about or understand. You don't have to go memorize the pyramid or something. Maslow didn't even make it into a pyramid. Somebody else did that. But the point is that there are a pyramid or a scale of needs that we have. As human beings, we are complex creatures that have psychological, emotional, and physical needs. I differentiate psychological from emotional in that I mean they're pretty much subset of one over the other, but sort of cognitive, I guess I could say, cognitive needs as opposed to emotional needs. But first thing coming out of a cult, even before all this understanding and stuff, is physical needs. Do you have a place to sleep? Do you have food? Do you have transportation? Do you have a means to get more of this? Do you have a support network of some kind? Any kind, parents, friends, anybody. Is there somebody you can go to, somebody you can talk to, somebody you can get help from? That's your first basic level. If you're not taking care of those things, none of the rest of this is going to be useful or helpful to you in any way, right? You're not going to be, worried about boundaries or trauma when you can't find food. So the basic physical needs are always the first order of business for somebody coming out of a cult. And this is where the Aftermath Foundation, for example, really shines, because they help somebody who comes out of the Sea Organization or out of Scientology with those basic needs. And without those basic needs taken care of, there really isn't any further conversation possible. Okay. Good. So, yeah, getting a job, transferring skills from the cult to the day-to-day, right? This is all your bottom level beginning stuff. Now, next thing to deal with. Trauma. I won't try centering all of these. I'll just type them out there as we're going. So trauma, right? What is it? What are its effects? What are trauma responses, triggers? See, I'm not going to sit here and do a whole rundown on trauma right now. I'm only pointing out to people here that it is a very important element of cult recovery that a person come to understand and deal with their trauma. However they're going to go about doing it. And that's the thing. Everybody's needs when it comes to how they're going to deal with their trauma is going to be different. Because the reason they have trauma is different. The experiences they had were different. The lingering effects of it are different. The triggers, the things that bring it back up and hit you in the face with it are different. I can't tell you exactly how to go deal with your trauma. All I can tell you is that there are resources to do so and engage you in going to find out what those resources are and dealing with it. Maybe that's therapy. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's psychoeducation. Maybe it's not. I mean, education is big for me, but maybe it's not for you. So what is, right? How are you going to deal with that? Because I think I'm on pretty safe ground when I say something like every single ex-cult member has trauma. That's a pretty blanket statement, but what are you listening to me for if you don't? Why be interested in a recovery process at all if there isn't some reason driving that need for recovery? What is that even about? It's about dealing with that trauma. Negative emotions, negative feelings, negative experiences that plague you, that continue to run your life in some fashion, one way or another, affect you at the worst possible times, in the worst possible ways, and often bring out the worst possible version of you. There are lots and lots of versions of us in life. And the trauma responses of the present are out of time. They're correct responses for an earlier time or for an earlier place or other contexts than the one you're in now, They're inappropriate, you could say. They don't make any sense. Somebody says salad to you and you blow up, like, what the hell, dude? Somebody reminds you, you smell something, you see something, you taste something, you hear something, and you're reminded of some earlier thing, and your subconscious just goes, rah! And you're like, wow, sometimes you surprise yourself with it. Everybody's got it, and it's not unique to cult survivors that they have trauma, but often there's levels of this and degrees of it, and many cult survivors have an awful lot of this that they're carrying around with them because they were physically abused, sexually abused, financially abused, and financial abuse is traumatizing. As well as the emotional and physical and psychological abuse. So all I wanted to put out there in terms of bringing up trauma as an element of recovery is not, I don't have a magic bullet for you. And here's the awful kind of situation here, as I've experienced it at least for 10 years now, is nobody's got the magic bullet to it. Because you have your stuff, and you're the one who has to figure out how to unravel it by getting help, by helping yourself, however you go about doing it, really. Now, obviously, there's some ways of dealing with trauma that are a little more constructive than others. Traumatizing other people and saying you're relieving your own trauma ain't how you do it. That's immoral. Right? It's unethical. It's not okay to turn yourself into a victimizer and say this is how you process being a victim. It's not okay to do that. Most of the time, it's illegal anyway. So don't go there. Processing trauma is not avoiding trauma, ignoring trauma, or pretending it doesn't exist, or going and dealing with it in ways that don't make any damn sense, right? Like going and taking on, becoming an alcoholic, or burying yourself in drugs, or burying yourself in sex, or burying yourself in some other thing that isn't dealing with the trauma. That's running away from it. That's not dealing with it. So learning what it is, learning how to deal with it, really important. But it's not my point today to tell you how to do that. You got to figure that out. Okay, so let's take a look at another element of this. And this one we're going to call, not /B, boundaries. Okay. This is another real important one. Cults concentrate on tearing down your boundaries. This is what confession culture is all about. If you look at methods of brainwashing, methods of forcefully changing people's minds, forcefully changing their beliefs, confession is one of the ways you go about doing that. And confession in a group setting, in front of bunches of people, or even in front of an individual, are boundary breaking. And some of our boundaries exist for a reason. We have secrets, and we have personal traits, and we have thoughts and ideas and beliefs that we keep to ourselves because that's our right. As a human being, you have the right to have thoughts and ideas that you don't have to share with anybody else. It's nobody else's business what's going on in your head. It only becomes other people's business when you're acting out. I don't care what your beliefs are. It doesn't matter. It's how you enable or act out those beliefs that becomes a matter of importance to other people. But that's not how you're taught in a cult. In a cult, you are to be transparent, open, honest with everybody about everything all the time. This is Scientology to a T, but it's also many other groups. They enforce this. They enforce confession. They enforce this sort of transparency. And the whole idea of personal boundaries and personal space and the right to have your own thoughts and feelings and beliefs and ideas about things, that's all torn down. It is heavily worked on. It's not an accident. It's a great way to control people. because you make them codependent. You force them to become dependent on the guru or on the group for validation and support and loyalty and understanding, because the group's judgment of the individual is what rules they're very worried about it. They're very concerned about what the rest of the group thinks about them and how they're acting, and are they being the good group member versus the bad group member. And boundaries, tearing down personal boundaries are a great way of getting a person into that state of mind. So understanding, reestablishing boundaries, even the concept of it, man, this can be really hard. So kind of important to understand that as a concept, understand what boundaries are about, and then learn how to reestablish them for yourself as a former cult member. You don't have to share everything. You don't have to share anything if you don't want to. It's up to you. But getting back to that frame of mind, that perspective, can be a real challenge. It becomes habitual to overshare. It becomes, I think you got the point. Okay. Now here's another one in terms of elements of recovery. That I believe is pretty important to understand and get your wits around. And that's hypnotism. What is it? How does it work? What's a trance? What's a trance state? Are there states? What does all this mean? There's controversy here, but it's good controversy. It's the kind of stuff you really want to find out all about. My best recommendation for learning about that at a common layman level without having to dive into Oxford books and deep, weighty tomes on this stuff, or having to go read, all of Erickson or whatever, is actually Darren Brown, this British mentalist guy. He does some wonderful, very, very entertaining shows that really do show how trance and how hypnotism and how inducing this in a person is not only possible, but it happens all the time. And all of us, I think, to one degree or another, enter into trance states. If you want to call it an altered state of consciousness, that's a way of thinking about it or framing it, but it's not the only way. But it's a way of thinking like, okay, if I'm engaged and I'm talking to you and I'm paying attention to you and you're paying attention to me and we're in the moment and we're having this conversation, we're not in a trance. We're kind of the opposite of that. We're aware, we're alive, we're talking, we're thinking, we're moving. That's kind of, a state of engagement, you could say. A trance state is where it's sort of just this one-way flow. It's like this this kind of inflow thing where somebody's telling you, dominating your psychology. They're sort of dominating your thought processes and feeding you information or commands. There is ethical and unethical hypnotism. There is knowing hypnotism and there is covert hypnotism where you don't know it's being done to you in the moment. Stage hypnotism is very, very much known about. You're there, you're up on the stage, right? You can induce that in some people, that trance state. Other people don't, right? A lot of people go along with it. Even after they get off the stage, they think, well, I went along with it, but did I? Wait a minute. There's all kinds of back and forth on that, but at least you know everything that's going on. You willingly, knowingly go into it voluntarily. Covert hypnotism is where somebody's messing with you. They are doing things to you and they're not asking permission first. And Hubbard is all about this. This is what Dianetics is, basically, at its heart. You could explain it lots of different ways. And this is one of the ways you could explain it, is it's covert trance induction and hypnotic suggestion. Just flat out. So, OTTR0, right? There are drills that you do in Scientology that induce trance and get you normalized with it. See, the point of TRs isn't necessarily to sit there for anybody with Scientology It's not just to sit there and put you in a trance state. It's to normalize a trance state. It's to get you there all like this is how I'm supposed to be. You know, it's a little bit of an indoctrination, brainwashing step in and of itself, just for that reason alone. Not to mention the other crap it lays on you about emotional suppression and all the other stuff. So, so hypnotism as a topic, or knowing about this, is important because it's not just L. Ron Hubbard who uses it. There are cult gurus all over the place who use hypnotic technique. They don't even have to know they're doing it for them to do it. They still do it. They will, okay, David Koresh used to sit and talk to his followers for hours and hours, preaching scripture at them and his ideas and interpretation of those scriptures. Do you think all those people were just sitting there absorbing every word in an engaged, mindful way? Of course not. Right? They just became zombies. They just sat there and listened and took it all in. And, that's how Koresh used hypnotic techniques. One of the ways. I would not have said that, David Koresh was a hypnotizer or a hypnotist, but that's one of the things that he had in his toolkit anyway, So that is, that's interesting stuff. Excuse me. Yes, I'm still kind of recovering, as ridiculous as that sounds. Excuse me. Okay. What else do I have on my list? If that is an element of recovery, or understanding that is, what else is? Well, how about this one? Therapy. Now, I talked earlier about trauma. I don't think that there's any way to recover from a cult experience if you don't come to some understanding of what therapy is and figure out how to deal with it. That may or may not involve going and getting some professional counseling or therapy from a professional. The things to know in terms of cult recovery about therapy is that not all therapists are the same. Not all therapists are trained the same. Not all schools of thought on how to go about engaging in therapy are the same. Therapy is not a monolithic structure of a very clear-cut techniques and methods. That's more like what Scientology is. That's what other pseudo-therapeutic cults are about, is offering you a 12-step or a 10-step or a bridge to total freedom or. That's my way or the highway thinking. That's like, okay, here's our approach. Here's what we're going to do. And every single person who comes into this group is going to go on this production line, and they're going to come out the other end a bright, shiny, happy person. And this, by the way, doesn't necessarily always involve a bridge to total freedom. It could involve prayer. It could involve learning your Gothard 7 principles and memorizing scripture and, walking the path of the 7 principles of spiritual enlightenment according to Bill Gothard. There's lots of ways this manifests in religious and non-religious settings. NXIVM didn't offer some religious scriptures, but it offered a path to, Keithhood, where you got to, emulate Rainier and try to be him. So all cults have something that they're giving you that is a path that you are expected to follow. And that path, whether it involves ritualistic sex or donations or, sitting in chairs staring at each other or sitting by yourself until you're levitating like they do at the highest levels of transcendental meditation, there's a path. And that path is set. And it's not a path that asks you to think a lot. It's a path that you're on that path and you are expected to walk it. And you are not successful as a cult member until you do. Well, out in the big wide world, therapy is the exact opposite of that. There's no peak place you're trying to get to. There's no certificate at the end of the road. There's no state you're going to reach where you're going to become a better, perfect human being and you don't need therapy anymore. That doesn't work like that in the real world. And so therapy becomes a path that you can walk, or an approach you can take, where you're going to have to shop around a bit. If you find the perfect therapist at your first try, you are a serious outlier. That is rare as a unicorn. You're going to have to do some looking, and you're going to have to do some searching and thinking and experimenting with what kind of therapy works for you and what doesn't. Because there's a lot of different kinds of therapy that can be done. There's emotion-focused therapy, art therapy, there's trauma-focused therapy, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's cognitive emotional therapy. There's just a laundry list of stuff you can go do, including non-therapy therapy, or therapy that doesn't really take a diagnostic approach. You know, over in Britain, they have this whole power threat meaning model of therapy, or approach to recovery, or approach to, to dealing with stuff. Has to do with power dynamics and sussing out the threats that exist in your life based on power differentials in your life, right? People in your authority figures, stuff like that. There's a lot of different approaches is the point. What's going to work for you? You got to find out. You got to kind of grab that by the reins, right? And really take control of that for yourself, because nobody's going to do it for you. Or actually, I should say, people will do it for you, but that's not how you should go about doing it. That's what you do in a cult, is you hand over the reins to somebody else and you go, okay, take me, Jesus, right? And that's not how to recover. So anyway, so I just thought I'd put that out there as a point. Thank you guys. Yeah, so you got to figure that out. And on top of this, just one other point to make about therapy is, there are really, really great therapists out there who don't know a goddamn thing about cults. And there are some really bad therapists out there who do understand cults, and everything in between. You can get good therapy from somebody who doesn't necessarily understand the situation you were in, if they're a good therapist first. And then you can work with them, and you talk to them, and they work with you, and you figure it out, right? And then there are therapists who are cult specialists, who understand the dynamics of it, understand coercive control, they get it. I think of people like Rachel Bernstein out in LA. She's been dealing with cult stuff for decades, right? She's also a family therapist, stuff that has nothing to do with cults. But you find somebody like that, a really well-rounded therapist who really does get it, they're worth their weight in gold. And, and unfortunately it costs to have therapy like that. So it's not necessarily something that's immediately available to people either. So this is the kind of thing that you have to sort of roll your way through, but you got to have a little bit of grit and determination to take the reins of your own recovery in your hands, and have a take charge attitude about this, because I've had I'm only speaking from my own experience and what I've dealt with other people, but I've seen people who, can sort of expect everybody else to do all the work for them. That's never going to be how this is gonna work for you, right? You've got to take the initiative with this. And on that note, actually, is our next point of this, which is similar, related, but not the same as therapy. And that is psychoeducation. Now, education in general is actually its own thing, right? Vocational training, job training, life experience education, relationship experience, or education. There's a lot of education that people might need coming out of a cult. But I'm not really talking about that kind of education. Here I'm talking very specifically about psychoeducation. Education or knowledge or learning about yourself and your psychological makeup and who you are and what drives you and makes you who and what you are. The driving question for me, and I know I'm not common. I know I'm not a average cult member when it comes to this particular thing. But the question that has driven me for 10 years, two questions that have driven me for 10 years. First question, what the hell happened to me? That was the first question. What the fuck happened to me in Scientology? And it took me years to figure that out, to go down all the rabbit holes, learn all the stuff, and finally get it, right? Okay, here's how Hubbard did it. Here's why he did it. I get it. That took a while. After that, the question that has been driving me is, why do people do the things they do? Why do people act the way they do? What drives people? And of course, I'm people. What drives me? I mean, I'm just as much part of that question as other people. Learning what cults do to you gives you so much insight into people. It doesn't give you, unless you're an unethical person, it doesn't give you power over other people. And I wouldn't want that. But it gives you insight. And I love insight, especially psychological insight into myself and into other people, right? You can only guess at other people. You can know with yourself. And psychoeducation is about learning about how you tick. And then you can apply it to other people too and kind of maybe figure out how they tick too. But but it gives you insight into how you were fooled, why you were fooled by the cult leader or by the cult members. And if you're clever about it, if you're doing it with initiative and you really want to make sure that you get what happened to you and why, it will armor you for the future. It will protect you. If you use that knowledge, it will protect you. Understanding methods of influence, understanding how thought reform works, understanding what brainwashing is and isn't, because there's an awful lot of false bullshit out there about this stuff too. So much. So understanding the truths and the lies and the nonsense and the separating the wheat from the chaff on this, so to speak, right, is part of navigating this journey of recovery. And I don't know how to do it without learning that stuff. Because every time I've helped somebody who didn't know these things, you help them as best you can in the moment with what you can help them with, and you get them to whatever you want to, wherever they want to go. But you just know they're going to run into it again, right? If they don't armor themselves, they're going to fall into the pit again, because they just naively walk through life and expect other people to, to take care of them and stuff. So that's real important, right? Psychoeducation, as far as I'm concerned, is first and last on the list. After the basic needs, right? It's been my thing from day one, and I just know I would never have gotten to this place where I could talk to you guys about this stuff without it. Never, right? It's not something you figure out. You have to go learn it. You don't just organically figure out how neurons work. You don't just organically know about the gut biome and the effect it can have on your thinking. You got to go learn this stuff. And when you learn it, you will never think the same way again. Ever. The fact that your food affects how you think in significant ways is kind of important. You know, what sleep has to do with this, what the cognitive aspects of this, what habits are, what ethics and morals, I mean, all this stuff. Anyway, it's just really good stuff. Okay. Learning about cognitive dissonance, for example, as a something that our brains do, man, is that eye-opening. And boy, does that clarify what other people get up to. Really interesting stuff. Okay, another one. And this is maybe considered a subset of psychoeducation, but I think about it differently than that, is memory. I'm going to get my capitalizations straight today. This is not high on the list, but it's interesting. I think it's an element of recovery, and here's why. Memory's fallible. Just because you remember something doesn't mean it really happened. And that can get really important when you're trying to deal with the trauma and the experiences of the past. It's good to check ourselves from time to time in terms of our memories. It's really good, and it can be very eye-opening. I have had many, many memories that I was absolutely 100%, like no question or doubt, I remember this properly. I know exactly what happened. I know exactly when it happened, and I know how it happened. And I was so dead wrong. Dates wrong, places wrong, context wrong. Just remembering the clothes wrong, remembering what people said wrong. And it's something you have to reconcile yourself to. You got to get your wits around this because it's humbling. And it's important to be humbled in this sense, because just because you think something happened doesn't mean it did. That's not to say that you should set up all these doubts in your mind and question yourself and not know what happened to you. Of course, things happen to you. But it's really important to fall back on the records as much as you can and find evidence for things as much as you can, because you're going to find along the path that you're going to step in a few potholes that your memory is going to present to you as though this happened and it didn't. And it can make the experience in the backstory of your own backstory be different than what it really was. And you can't recover from things that didn't happen to you. They only get worse because you're remembering them badly, you know? So obviously, I'm not saying right now that everything you think happened to you didn't happen to you. There's no judgment here. I'm not judging anybody or anybody's story. I'm telling you that memory sucks. It's a fact. It just does. Our memories are not anywhere near as precise or approximate as L. Ron Hubbard presented in Scientology, for example. Mental image pictures my ass. There's no such thing. These constructs that L. Ron Hubbard created in Dianetics are pure fantasy. And a lot of cults have a mental model that they offer to their members, especially the religious ones or the NXIVM style ones, the self-help pseudo-therapeutic ones. They've got a whole constructed model of what your mind is and how your brain works or how you think or how your spirit relates to your body and all of this stuff. This is all in Scientology. And all of it is total horseshit. So if you come out of Scientology thinking, I got engrams and locks and secondaries, and that's how my mind works, you're out of your mind. That's not how it works at all. And you're going to give yourself a lot more credence for your memories than you should. So it's a point of staying humble, and it's an important one, because it also highlights why it is that as ex-cult members, we need to consult with other people who were also there, or family or friends who remember you, so that you can compare notes, basically, is what I'm saying. So you can, like, keep yourself grounded. Trauma especially can mess with people's heads. So you bring trauma and the fallibility of human memory together, and you can have a shit show on your hands very quickly. Happens. Happening right now in the world. So, okay. So that is a factor. Okay, good. We're moving right along here. How's this going? Are you guys getting stuff out of this? Is this going through this way? Is this a so far it's been pretty good. Okay. I'm just going to carry on because I still have a few points to go over here. All right, so I'm going to try to maybe speed this up a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. You know how I go on and on. Okay. Capital schmapital. Who needs it? Morality. Okay, ethics and morality. I believe that this is also something very important to the recovery process as an element of recovery, is thinking about, examining, learning, and really taking a good, hard look at your moral foundations, at your moral principles. And what do I mean by that? I mean what you personally, individually, as a person, what you think is good and bad and right and wrong in terms of conduct and belief and all of that. All of that is the umbrella of morality. There are different theories and ideas and writings about morality. There is no shortage of people in the world who are going to be more than happy to dictate your morality to you at every level of our society, ideologically, religiously. It's all around us. Right? Moral outrage is the name of the game on social media. And you will get shovelfuls of it in your face daily. Right? You're wrong. That's wrong. You're a fill in the blank phobe. You're a hater. You're a this. No shortage of labels coming at you in this world over moral outrages. Right? So it would be a pretty good idea, as a former cult member who has had an entire system of morality laid on you and enforced on you, and the longer you're in the cult, the longer this is enforced on you. It'd be a pretty good idea. Take a good hard look at that. Figure out, do you believe that this is true or good or right because your cult leader said so, or because you think so? Is this thing wrong because somebody said it is, or because that's how you see it? And if it's wrong, why is it wrong? Why? Challenge yourself. Ask yourself these questions. They're important questions to ask when it comes to your values, because your values are what drive your emotions and drive your behavior. Moral foundations are, as far as I'm concerned, the baseline of our cognitive functions. They align all of it, because it's what we think of as survival. If it's good, it's survival. If it's bad, it's not. So what's good and bad to you? Not just socially amongst your friends, but to you. Like we have to examine things like engrams from Scientology, right? Mental image pictures of pain and unconsciousness that drive your behavior, right? That's what an engram is in Scientology. We got to look at that. We got to go, okay, that's bullshit, right? There's no such thing. there's other ways of explaining the behavior that engrams explain without having to have reactive minds and engrams. Those are just bullshit constructs. Well, in the same light, you have got to break down greatest good for greatest number of dynamics and L. Ron Hubbard's principles of what's right and wrong and good and bad, because he had very clear-cut principles. All cult gurus do. That's how they bind your choices. That's the whole point of the bounded choice model, is defining for you what's acceptable and unacceptable, what's good and bad. And you come out of the cult, that shit sticks with you. It stays. Because we don't think about our moral foundations as beliefs. It's just the way the world is as far as we're concerned. It's not, it's below beliefs in a way. They are beliefs, but you understand the way we think about them and the way we interpret them and act on them, it's so tied into our sense of self, of who we think of ourselves as, that if you don't examine this and break it down for yourself, and this doesn't require you changing anything, but at least know and know for yourself that the principles you're operating on make sense to you. Because a lot of the stuff that gets laid onto people in cults doesn't make any sense, but it sure sounds like it does. Oh, greatest good for greatest number of dynamics. Oh, yeah, that's so altruistic. Of course that's the way I should live my life. Not always. Not every decision needs to line up that way, nor should it. Sometimes your first dynamic is more important than the other 7 dynamics. That kind of thing. Yeah, lots and lots and lots of attention in Scientology is put on ethics. Why do you think that is? Because it's not only one of the easiest ways to control somebody, it's one of the most powerful ways to control them over time. If you want to control a group of people at a fundamental level, you establish what is good and bad and right and wrong. There is nothing you can do to a group of people that is more powerful than that. Nothing. I will die on that hill. I am giving you my opinion right now, but that is an opinion that I will absolutely back up forever. So morality and the foundations of your morality are crucial to review when you come out of a cult. Not necessarily on day 1 or 2. I didn't really put these in strict order, but they're kind of in an order here. Okay. This other stuff we talked about first is kind of more basic and more important in a lot of ways, because it's kind of in your face a lot more. But there comes a point along the line when you're going to have to take a look at this. If you don't, guess what? You're still acting like a cult member, because you're still walking around with the cult's values. And you can change your cognitive thinking and your emotional intelligence, and you can conquer these things. But if you don't sort of take that ice cream scoop and sort of core out the morals that were instilled in you, then you're still going to parallel cult behavior, because you're still going to be acting that way. Okay. Killing that dead horse, I'm sure. Let's take a look here at another point. And that point is religion. Nothing controversial here. All I wanted to say about this is you get to decide for yourself now. There's a lot of freedom for people coming out of cults when it comes to this topic of religion, if you grant it to yourself. If you give yourself, again, time, energy, resources, the mindfulness, right? You pay attention, you put some effort into thinking about reading about, learning about religion, what it is, what it isn't. Your experience of it was only one experience. I don't care what religion you were part of, what belief system you had, it was limited in scope. You were bound to think a particular way. And the fact of the matter is that there is a spectrum of religion that is so broad, it's hard to actually get your wits around the full scope of it, especially early on coming out of a cult when you're so locked into the belief system you had. It's a little bit of freedom and a little bit of joy to really give yourself the time and the latitude to just explore again when it comes to religion and religious thinking. And what belief sets do you want to adopt? And there's also a liquidity, a sort of, like you can change whenever you want. In a cult, you don't have that freedom. It's the opposite of that. You're locked into a belief system that cannot be questioned or changed. Ever. For any reason. You're not the guy who gets to change it. Or question it even. Outside, it's opposite of that. If you give yourself that freedom. Religion is a huge subject. There's a lot of people in the world who are going to be willing to summarize it down to very simple concepts for you. Don't let them. It's an easy invitation to simplistic thinking, but give yourself more. There's a lot to explore with it. There's the social aspects of it, the community aspects of it, the purpose and meaning that it gives you, the emotional satisfaction and certainty that it can provide can be incredibly comforting. And it can feel weird, odd, strange, wrong, immoral to question these things. It can feel like you're really putting yourself in Satan's shoes or some shit. You can really feel like you're evil for even asking questions. You're not evil for asking questions. It was evil of them to forbid you to ask questions. That was the evil part, and they reframed it as good. They reframed that as holy and righteous and good and pure. It's not. Human beings are naturally curious. We want answers to questions. Some of those answers we don't have yet. Religion provides a lot of answers that are big maybes, and some of them will make sense to you if you give yourself the time and latitude to explore them. It's okay to do that. It's more than okay. So I wanted to kind of throw that out there. All right, let's take a look at another element of recovery here. Empathy, not empathy. There it is. Empathy. Oh, sure. Just in terms of, one suggestion OBG Foster says here, when talking about figuring out your own morals, could you frame it in terms of why the cult system is not moral? Yes, absolutely. And the summary thought here that I would respond to on that, going back to the morals issue, is the cult morals are your personal ideas of what's good and bad and right and wrong. They're your ethics. They're your standards for yourself. Cults have a very rigid control system which demands compliance so that you will be a good little soldier and you will learn to not question. It was not ours to reason why. It was merely ours to do or die. And I think is the Samuel Taylor Coleridge quote, right, from that old poem. It is your right to decide these things for yourself. It is no group's job to dictate to you down to the comma what's good and bad and right and wrong in this world. You have to determine that for yourself in the context of your own life and the situations you run into. Now, if you go committing acts that are harmful to other people in the process, other people are going to have something to say about it. Morals are not a consequence-free thing. And that's the whole point, is navigating the world of right and wrong and good and bad so that you're not abusing and hurting and harming or destroying other people in the process of aggrandizing or surviving yourself. That's the whole point. So part of this, of course, is learning your chosen place in the world and how you fit in. And the cult is dictating to you a model of this is the uniform, this is the personality, this is the moral foundation, this is how you are to act, little Mr. Robot Automaton cult member. That's what the cult puts in you. And you get to, as an ex-cult member, you get to just shed that whole thing. Just take off those clothes, just take off that, that moral template that they laid over you. Because it was always about victimizing you and making you somebody who would never, ever question the leader. Every cult has one thing in common: a moral foundation that the cult leader is the source of goodness and righteousness and what is true. Every time that is true of a cult. So that's why examining that, diving into that, and refiguring, recalibrating yourself morally is getting yourself out from under that slave system of morality that was instilled in you. It's another way of putting it. Okay, so now empathy. Here's why this is an element of cult recovery, is because you didn't experience empathy in the cult. You experienced a fake version of that. This is what we call love bombing, as one manifestation of this, right? Or this awe induction, this euphoria, this love induction. My cult leader is everything to me. He's infallible, and I just couldn't live without him or her, or right? This whole like fake, gooey, syrupy bullshit that they call empathy or love in a cult is gross. It's such a gross shadow of what real empathy actually is. Empathy is hard to come by in this world, especially these days. We want it from our family. We learn to get it from our friends. That's how we choose friends. Empathy is important to understand as a concept so that you can spot when it's real and when it's not, and what it really feels like to empathize with somebody else, to understand, to have real compassion and understanding for somebody is an incredible leap of ourselves into somebody else. You cannot, in your entire life, you will never be able to experience what somebody else has experienced. You'll never really be able to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. You can only project your idea of what that person's life and view and all of that could be or is based on your experience of them, and you project that out into them. That process done in a compassionate, kind way, that's empathy. You can't be in their head, but you can imagine what it must be like, and you can put yourself as best you can into their position and go, okay, I get where they could be coming from, enough to understand them so that I don't have to feel like I don't understand them, I hate them, I want to destroy them, right? These are the opposite of empathy. The opposite of not understanding somebody is, kind of hating them or fearing them. This is where fear comes from of other people all the time. So compassion, tolerance, understanding, right? This is empathy, and or these are outgrowths or manifestations of empathy. And I think that because we didn't get it in a cult to such a degree that it was robbed of us, that again, this is something that we explore and understand as former cult members, right? We take some time to figure this out. What is empathy? Why is this important? What is this thing they're always going on about? Another point about this, and a real important part of it, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of cult structure or how cults work, if you want to kind of have a window into how cults work, most cult members, this is my opinion, most cult members are weaponized empaths. They're empathetic people. They want to be part of groups. They want to get involved. They want to help. They want to do something about things, themselves, other people, especially the people who join the cults and work for the cults, like Scientology, right? The staff, the Sea Org members. They don't do that because they're narcissistic predators, not for the most part. For the most part, they do it because they're empathic people who want to make a difference and want to make the world better. And the cult offers them an avenue to do so by becoming the worst versions of themselves. And they believe in their empathic self, well, the best way to save the world is to destroy it. The best way to make the world a better place is to get rid of all these people. Then we'll have paradise. In Scientology, that's the psychs. That's all the SPs. We got to get rid of all those people. Round them up on a boat, blow them up. The world would be better off without them. There's not one cult anywhere that doesn't have a dogma like that. They all have it. Us versus them. And empaths are the most powerful force in this world when it comes to getting shit done. When they believe in their cause. I've said before, and this is something I still stand by, there is nothing more dangerous to the world at large than a young person who's convinced he's saving it. Right? Because they become weaponized empaths. Their empathy is used in such a way that they destroy things in the name of saving it, or helping it, or making things better. That's the position most of us in cults were in. Some people were in cults because they were predators. And they come out of the cult and they're still predators. Surprise! That happens. That happens all the time. But most of us aren't that. And it's important to understand that. Okay. Then we have... This is going to be a big surprise to everybody. Critical thinking. Okay. You know, my channel's all about critical thinking. I've spent an awful lot of time explaining different elements of critical thinking and parts of it and all that. Why is it important to cult recovery? Because, again, it's something you didn't do when you were in the cult. Not about the cult itself, mind you. The most brilliant critical thinker in the world might be stuck in some cult right now, but I'll tell you what that person is not critically thinking about. Their cult. That's the whole point of extremism and extreme levels of belief, is it shuts down your frontal lobes. It shuts down your ability to think critically about the thing you're extremist about. Whether it's some social culture war thing, whether it's some political thing, whether it's some religious thing, some cult thing, whatever it is you're absolutely adamant about and cannot move on and will not even consider thinking about, that's the thing you can't critically think about. That's the thing that's got you by the balls, if I'm being blunt, right? And we all have those things, but cult members have those things kind of drilled into them at levels and degrees that most people don't really do to themselves. You know, you can self-radicalize if you want to, but it's so much easier in a cult because all the peer pressure and all the demands and everything are pushing you in that direction. And the one thing you're not doing the entire time you are in the cult is thinking critically about it, because you wouldn't be there if you were. It's not even an opinion. It's not even like an invalidation. It's not an insult to people. It's a fact, right? The sun is not up at night. People in cults are not critically thinking about their cult, because the second they start doing that is when they start moving out of the cult. And when they've restored their ability to think even a little bit critically about it, they get the hell out. And that happens all the time. But once you're out, you got to really take a good hard look at, why the hell did I not critically think about this a lot earlier? And there's a lot of blame, shame, and self-regret and self-blame and guilt that goes along with this. And it doesn't have to be. You don't have to do that to yourself. There's no reason to beat yourself up about it. Learn from the experience and learn how to critically think during those times when it's the hardest to do. When you're all riled up emotionally is the hardest time to think critically. It's like there's a shut-off switch in our brain, and it just doesn't let you think when you're feeling these intense feelings. You know, it's like this kind of a scale or something, I guess, is a way of putting it. You gotta grant yourself that, but remember that for me, and talking about critical thinking is it would be, when I say this as part of cult recovery, what I mean is to develop this skill the same way you would develop martial arts skills. You practice, practice, practice. You knowingly, gruelingly practice. You take time. You instill a discipline in yourself to do it, because your body, your mind, your circumstances will conspire to get you to not think critically. You're getting sold on something, you're getting sold, you're getting advertised to, you're getting converted to some story. And all of those situations where that stuff happens to you, they're exerting emotional buttons and reactions against you purposefully to shut down the critical thinking and get you to decide or make a choice or spend the money or do the thing. Now, taka, 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 let's go, right? That old chestnut. So anyway, critical thinking, it can't be ignored. It can't be something you just take for granted, because that's how it got you in the cult, is you thought you were a good critical thinker. You thought you could think your way through things. Got to learn. And believe me, it's an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. Just like with this next thing, it's something that you're going to be working on kind of in a way for the rest of your life. And so just kind of get used to it. It's okay. It's okay to not be the best at something. It's okay to not be great at something, and keep working on it. Just because, you know, if at first you don't succeed, all that kind of thing, right? It's really, this is one of those important ones. The other one is, I'm going to say emotional IQ just because intelligence won't fit on the screen here, but emotional intelligence. Just like you have to develop critical thinking, you have to develop emotional intelligence. And by that, I mean, if critical thinking is understanding logical fallacies, right, is understanding logic, reason, these little pack of cards we go over every week, critical thinking, right? What are straw man arguments? What is false cause? What is a belief bias? What is, the fallacy? What are these things? This is how we screw ourselves cognitively, thinking. Right? So good critical thinking is learning how to stop screwing yourself. in your thought processes, how to think more logically, more reasonably. Not being Mr. Spock, but just thinking more logically. It's a good skill to have. You can think your way through some really interesting puzzles out there. But emotional intelligence is realizing that critical thinking isn't the only thing going on in your head. And in fact, it's not even the primary driver. Your emotions are. Your moral foundations, then your emotions, then your critical thinking. That's the sequence it goes in. So emotional intelligence, understanding your own emotional life and your emotional reactions. What makes you angry? What makes you sad? What makes you happy? What gets you depressed? What irritates you? What creates emotional responses in you? Because here's the thing. You're having emotional responses whether you want them or not, or whether you understand them or not. 24/7, you're having them. Probably a good idea to figure out what they are. What is an emotion? You got to figure that out for yourself. How do you know when you're having an emotional experience, right? Sometimes they're subtle. It's not always, woohoo, right? Bouncing off the walls. I'm not talking about extreme emotions. I'm talking about your entire emotional life. And the reason this is important, super important, more important, I think, than critical thinking, actually, now that I've come to this. Most important thing about emotional intelligence is understanding how manipulatable they are. How push button you become because of your emotions. Right? People can push your buttons and get you to do things. Even if you're not doing it happily or pleasantly, if they can piss you off and get you to do a thing, okay, this is how I'm going to get him to do it. I'm going to piss him off and he's going to go do it. And there you are being manipulated with your anger or your happiness or your hope or your joy or your sadness or you have a range of emotions, a wide spectrum of emotions. All of us do. Every human being has that gift, if you will. It's the thing that makes life livable, our emotional experiences. But it's also the thing that controls us and makes us into little push-button automatons if we're not wise about our own emotional life. You cannot control your emotions. Let's get that out of the way right now. There's no controlling this. There's mitigating and managing it. Because the emotions happen before you're thinking about it. So that's why I say you can't control having the emotions. But the more you understand where they come from, how they're formed, how I believe they are constructed. I'm big on Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotions. I think she's onto something with that. But that's one theory. There are others. Figure it out for yourself. There's no one right answer here. But the topic of emotions and your own understanding of your emotional life, there's no substitute for it. Nothing else on this list is going to make up for not having this. And having this puts you in the driver's seat of other people manipulating you emotionally. And that's the number one way that people do manipulate you. Whether it's advertisers, cult leaders, your mother, your kid, they're manipulating you emotionally. 24/7. So you might as well figure out what this is about. Yeah. And on that, also, similar or riding on that, is this next bit, which is not emotional intelligence, but emotional needs. Okay, and you guys, I'm not going to belabor this. I talk about this all the time on this channel. Emotional needs are, on my Post-it note of glory here, I have them listed because they're so important. Emotional needs are a deeper level thing than your emotional reactions. Emotional reactions happen in the moment. You get mad, you get sad, you get, whatever. Emotional needs are longer term things that reside deeper in you. They're tied to your ego. They're tied to your sense of self, how you view yourself or see yourself, and how you go about navigating the world based on what you feel satisfies you. We're all different. I don't get satisfaction out of going to the opera, but some people do. There's different things that satisfy our emotional needs. What we can say universally, what is true of every single human being, even psychopaths, even people who don't have a conscience, because everybody's actually got a conscience. Their values are all fucked up. But every single human being has emotional needs. So, I mean, it's the same as saying every human being has a brain. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that basic to us. And emotional needs consist of things like a sense of community. Feeling empty or needing a sense of community is a very, very powerful emotional need, a lot of us that we have. Having a sense of self and ego and needing to satisfy or gratify that ego. Feeling that we are important in some sense. Even if it's just to ourselves or the people around us, we have to feel that way. There's a bucket in us that we have to fill, or we're not happy. We're not satisfied. We feel something's off or wrong in our life. That's emotional needs. Sense of security, a sense of volition, movement, freedom to move, freedom to navigate our life, make choices. A sense of attention, having attention given to us, putting attention on other things or other people, but certainly to us, ties in with ego. Emotional connection is an emotional need. The feeling of meeting of the minds is one thing, but meeting of the emotions of the heart, that's another. A very different feeling within us when we're satisfying that need. That's one of our needs, right? Need for privacy. I was talking about confession culture earlier. It's actually an emotional need that we have a sense of self and a sense of privacy and secrets and things we're not telling other people. It's, again, how we see ourselves and how we create a self-image. So these and other things make up our emotional needs. And this is something that I've gone on and on and on and on and on for hours about here, so I won't belabor the point about how cults take advantage of your emotional needs especially during times of travail or difficulty or uncertainty, when things are shaky and you're on shaky ground and feeling like things aren't going well. Your emotional needs are out of whack. And they are most of the time for most of us, by the way. It's not like there's some peak level where everything's wonderful. That lasts for a day or two. Right? And then something's throwing your emotional needs out of whack again, right? So that's kind of an important thing to know. Okay, another thing is identity. Covered this a bit already, a little bit above when we talked about first gen versus second gen. But this is the identity, understanding who you are, thinking about who you are, what makes you who you are. This is a really important, I believe this is an important aspect of cult recovery, because it helps you sort out the cult identity from, that version of you, from how you want to be or who you want to be. All these things are reflective of that, right? Your critical thinking, your empathy, your emotional intelligence, your emotional needs, all ties into this. So this is almost not a separate thing, but it is. You don't have to go get a degree in identity theory or personality theory in psychology to understand that you are you, and there are things that make you you, and a little reflection on what those things are. And, the moral foundations tie into this, obviously, can help separate you from that cult identity. And if you're not even aware of this stuff, or that identity is a thing or something you should be thinking about or something that resides within you, Well, now you have something to think about because it does, and you do have an identity, and that can be, again, something that if you're not aware of it, not thinking about it, don't give this a lot of thought, it's probably something that's used to manipulate you. Well, only a good, how do we put this? This is a logical fallacy called no true Scotsman, right? The no true Scotsman fallacy, where, you can be wrangled into a corner with identity, right? Well, if you're really a true Christian, then you will go to church every Saturday and Sunday. If that's part of your identity and you're going to sit here and tell me you're a good Christian, then that means, and here I am, Joe Blow, dictating to you what your identity should mean for you. Probably not a great way to navigate life, having other people determine how you should act and behave and be based on their idea of your identity. Better that you figure it out and stand by it. And that's what integrity is, by the way. Kind of basic stuff, right? Okay, another one. This is important. Community. What do we mean by that, right? As an ex-cult member, you're going to have to find, grow, navigate communities of people. The ex-cult community is a community. It's a group of people who are united around the fact that they used to be in the cult that you are in, and now they're not. I'm going to really quickly close my door because my wife just got home and it's going to get noisy in the house. 1 second. And I'm back. Okay, I should have closed the door, but Benson was around. Okay, so community is, maybe I should have put it higher on the list because it's something you hit right away when you come out of a cult if you're looking for it. You want support. You want to navigate the world with other people who are going to understand and empathize with you. This ties in with other elements here very much. But there's some warning signs here. That I just wanted to throw out there. Again, 10 years out, right? Navigating this for all these years, I've learned a few things that I wanted to share. And not everybody's going to have the same experience. I don't, probably not, OBG Foster, on your question there about adverse childhood events or self-parenting. I'm going to have to think about that one. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Okay, but I strayed. Let me finish this. So here's the thing about community, right? Is that once you're out of a cult, the only thing you have in common with the other people in an ex-cult community is that you are all part of that cult. There can be an awful lot of kumbaya and group support available in an ex-cult community. I am in no way, shape, or form trying to say don't be part of those communities or don't partake in those activities. That ain't my flow at all. What I'm trying to say here is don't think it's another cult outside the cult that you're going to go be part of and everybody's going to be on the same page. Don't lie to yourself about that because that's not true. It's just not. You're going to now that all those folks have come out of the cult, they get to be independent thinkers again. They get to express who they really are and go live that life. And that's good for them. That's great. Please go do that. But don't think that because you were on the same page in the cult, you're going to be on the same page outside. Spiritually, psychologically, ideologically, religiously, hobby-wise, like anything you can imagine, you're going to run into wild divergences of opinion. And that's okay. That's the variety that makes, the spice of life, right? That's a good thing that everybody comes out of a cult and goes off in wildly different directions. That's entirely predictable even. It should be that way because the uniformity of thinking is no longer being enforced on them. But it can also lead to some pretty surprising and interesting arguments and problems with other people that you thought you were on the same page as. And that can get ugly. It can get really ugly really fast. And it's something you have to be aware of because it's a foible of the ex-cult world. The thing that joins people outside of a cult is the mutual shared trauma of and experiences of the cult. But that's it. So find common cause, find common thinking, form alliances, form friendships. Do those things. Please go for it. But just know that life outside the cult is not going to be all on the same team as it was in. All of those individual differences, the whole point of the cult, of course, is all those individual differences were suppressed and pushed down and made negligible or made unimportant, and people couldn't express themselves or be who they really were. Well, now that they're out, they can, and they will. And good on them for doing so. You should too, right? But it's just something to be wary about and understand. The other thing about community outside of a cult is not only is there, potential issues or pitfalls with former cult members, but also with people who were never in the cult. That other group of people, the much larger group you're going to run into, are going to be these people who have no idea what you're talking about, what you went through, and they don't care. Or some of them care, but for very wildly different reasons. Some people will empathize with you. Some people will understand and support you in your journey of recovery. An awful lot of people are only going to be entertained by it. I really wish it wasn't that way, and there's a lot of wishes I have about how the world should be, but the real world is the way that it is. And you coming out of a cult can often have a very, very strong, what's the term? Main character syndrome. As a cult member, we would tend to be thinking and told all the time that we're the most important people in the world. Our cult is the cult of cults. It's the group of groups. It's the we sing the song of songs. We have the truth and the light and the only possible answer for all of humanity. That's a head rush, man. That is an ego boost beyond all ego boosts. When you think you are walking on, clouds of rarefied air because you have all the sacred knowledge and truth, or you have the status or symbols that that make you better or superior to everybody else, it can be quite a fall to hit reality and hit the ground and realize that that was all just an illusion, and you were never all that and a bag of cookies or whatever. So that can be incredibly humbling. The support and the friendship and the community that you can find in the world isn't going to be a substitute for that main character syndrome that we were walking around with as cult members, right? If I'm using that term right. We are no longer the center of anybody else's universe. And we never really were, but we were sure telling ourselves we were. And so other people will relate to you in very, very different ways than they did when we were all in the cult. And there's a danger in the status of being an ex-cult member who is telling your story. Doesn't have to be a danger in this, but it's there, and it would be silly of me to not acknowledge it. It would be wrong, I think, for me to not talk about this because it's a very real problem, right? Is that you can hit the ground, and after some time or a short period of time or even a long time, you can start telling your story. You can start relating to people on camera or off as an ex-cult member, you start positioning yourself that way, and people are going to look at you a particular way. And some of them are not going to be friendly, and some of them are going to be outright hostile about it. And some of them are only going to be very, very interested in you because you have some salacious, interesting story to liven up their otherwise dull lives. And please know that I'm not talking to any of you guys who are watching this right now, because I don't think that's what my audience consists of. But there are other, channels and audiences, and there are other things I've seen in the world beyond YouTube where this is very, very true. This goes well beyond any kind of YouTube community I'm talking about here. This is out in the big wide world. So that's just a thing you got to know about, and kind of navigate a little bit. And I just wanted to share that experience of it. Because you want support when you come out. You want community. You want to generate community and for yourself. It's an emotional need you have. You're gonna try to do it whether you want to or not. So having your head on straight about that, and kind of realizing that it's not the same as when you were in the cult, I think that's a good thing to acknowledge. I think that's important. Okay, couple more points here, and we are going to be done here, but there are a couple of important points. Okay, because here's what we haven't talked about yet, right? Mental situations that you're going to be walking around with, that you're going to be kind of stuck with for a while. Cults change you. Cults do things to you, and trauma and inducing trauma in a person, abusing somebody, changes them, and it can cause, over an extended period of time, it can cause some real damage to people, and they can walk out of a cult with conditions that are now diagnosable and very, very treatable, by the way. Nothing here is untreatable, what I'm about to talk about. But if you don't recognize that these situations or these mental situations exist, if you're thinking you're coming out of a cult and you're the definition of normal, odds are that's not true. And if there was an awful lot of trauma, there can be situations that we call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And if it happened, if there was more than one instance, if there was a repeating pattern of abusive behavior over time, you can end up with a condition that is called complex PTSD. It's very different from a one-off PTSD. You go into combat, you have some horrifying, atrocious thing happen to you. Some people come out of that and they're just not the same. And they need some treatment. They need some help. Their nervous system, their brain, it was overloaded. Well, imagine if you're a child being thrown into a situation like that repeatedly, or an adult. Children is even worse, but adults get it too. And you get this re-traumatization, this you're victimized over and over, whether you're beaten, whether you're emotionally suppressed, whether you're bankrupted, whether you're, whatever. You're abused. We all know what cult abuse is. And you can walk out of these situations with some kind of messed up thinking that you don't really have control over, especially if you don't even recognize it for what it is. There are other mental situations that can exist in a person as an ex-cult member that were denied, negated, invalidated when you were in the cult. ADHD is an example, right? Sorry. I always get this. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Thank you for your patience. I didn't want to get that wrong. I always screw it up. Attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder. This is something that manifests in childhood, by the way. This is not something that a cult will give you. It's not contagious. It's a neurological condition, but it is something that cults will relabel, deny, tell you is something else entirely, and miss on and miss on and miss on, right? There's all kinds of disorders and conditions people can have that cults will not acknowledge or will tell you is something completely wrong and different. On the order of, it's not a disease you have, you're possessed by demons. It's not a condition you have, it's your chakras are out of alignment. I mean, it's this level of misinterpretation. And you can walk around for years thinking your chakras are out of alignment, and it has nothing to do with it. Right? And you can't pay attention, and you're hyper focused sometimes, and you're all over the place other times, and it's really hard to get shit done, right? And this is ADHD, and it's a bear to have on your back. It sucks to have ADHD, but it's a condition. A lot of people have it, and it's treatable and dealable and manageable and all the rest. But if you don't know you have it, if you're not aware of it, if you're not aware it's a thing, if your cult has been denying it for years, you can be in a pretty weird place. So as an ex-cult member, it behooves you to find out about these things. This does not require years of therapy or treatment or anything like that. You can manage this shit on your own. There are ways of doing this and dealing with it depending on who you are and how you live your life. Okay, I'm trying to get across that. First, finding out about these things is super, super important, because then you can do something about it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so any of these things are a thing. And also, it's a little bit of freedom and a little bit of interesting stuff to learn about narcissism and antisocial personality disorder, which is also known as psychopathy, and, sociopathy, and what are the differences and similarities between these things, and the fact that people can have multiples of these things at once. It's not just one thing. Anybody who's telling you there's one wrong thing about anybody probably is being a little simplistic. There's weaponized empathy, which we talked about earlier. That's something to know about. But you know what else there is to know about? Toxic empathy. That's a thing, right? Those of us weaponized empaths, there can be toxic levels of empathy. There can be levels of empathy a person has where they are unwilling to acknowledge that bad people are bad. This kind of thing. Oh, everybody's so wonderful. No, they're not. There are predators out there. That's what we led with here in this video today, right? Is that they're out there. Whether you like it or not, whether you recognize them or not, whether you want them to be or not, they're out there. And if you have this sort of toxic levels of positivity, which a lot of cults instill in people, this is a habit that you can take out of a cult, is you can just be a toxically positive person. And this is a rougher one. This is down into the bottom of the list, because this is the stuff that's nuanced, right? It can be easy to take a positive person and turn them into a really bad version of themselves by negating the positivity. I'm not trying to do that. Being a positive person, being an optimist rather than a pessimist, for example, probably a good thing. But there is too much of a good thing. And that's something to be aware of and know about. Another sort of high level or more advanced stage of this, I don't even know how to put it, really. I don't want to put value judgments or use language that's going to try to impose value judgments on this stuff. That's not the point of this entire video, is to lay any value judgments on you or tell you how good or bad you're doing based on my list here. These are just points I think are important. And one of those things, and one of the most difficult ones, is victimizer. Yeah, that one. This is something that all of us ex-cult members are going to have to deal with and sort out before too long. It wasn't the first thing I was thinking about. It took me a couple years to actually get around to this. But I think a full, honest, transparent kind of look at this requires that we take a good hard look at the fact that there are victims in cults, and there are also victimizers. And often we all played both roles. So that's just something to think about. I'm not going to belabor that point, but it is something to think about. Because it rolls into this next point, which is the final one for today, and the last one I have on my list. And that is responsibility. How do you own what you did? How do you own what was done to you? How do you make up for it? How do you deal with it? How do you carry on in your life knowing that there's a part of your life where you were a complete and utter asshole to a bunch of people? Maybe physically, maybe psychologically, or emotionally, right? Maybe other ways. There's a reconciliation there. There's a reckoning that you have to have within your own mind, within your own self. This is tied in with everything we've talked about today, actually. I don't know if any of these points that we talked about don't touch on these final 2 points. Because there's a recognition of what was done to you, and it was awful. If you were in a cult, it was awful. That's the whole point of, a cult. Even if it was a cult of 2. Still a cult. And you were victimized. But then you victimized other people. Your spouse, your other people, other cult members, whatever. You hurt them. You abused them. You did things to them. The cult told you to. The cult wanted you to. In the model of the cult, within the world of the cult, it made sense to do those things. You thought you were doing good, and you weren't. You were doing objectively bad things. But you didn't know that at the time, unless you were a psychopath. And they exist, but they're not watching this video. Those of us who are not psychopaths, we feel sorry about that. We feel bad. We gotta work on that. We gotta figure that out. Like, oh shit, how am I supposed to think about myself? How am I a good person if I did those bad things? Well, how about the fact that you can see they're bad? That's a step. How about wanting to do something about it? How about going and apologizing? How about doing something about it? That makes you a good person, see? Because what else are you supposed to do? You cannot ever, no matter who you are, no matter how good you are, no matter how much money you have, no matter how much power you accumulate to yourself, for the rest of your life, there is one thing you are not ever, ever going to be able to do. You can't change the past. You can't go back and relive it. You can't do something different. And you never will be. So beating yourself up about that in the past is a useless activity. It has no value to your life whatsoever to continue to beat yourself up about what you did when you were in the cult. Down that road, there be dragons. So instead, reconcile it. Figure it out for yourself. You're the only one who can, by the way. There will be no shortage of people in the world who are going to be happy to judge you for what you did while you were in a cult. Oh, the judgments are a dime a dozen. From people who you better not judge them. Oh, you better not turn the mirror on them. Oh, gonna get ugly. How dare you, right? But they are more than happy to judge you. Oh, layers and layers and layers of judgment will be piled on you for what you did when you were in. You're the one who has to reconcile that because you're the one who has to live with yourself. And making up to a bunch of judgmental assholes is not how you recover from a cult. You figure it out for yourself. You do what you need to do. People see you for who and what you are, based on what you do moving forward, not moving backwards, and not keeping yourself stuck in some mud or some bullshit, dejected, I'm nothing, I'm worthless, I'm horrible. Yeah, just fuck all that. It's not necessary. Right? You don't owe the world anything. It's important that you know that. You owe yourself a life. And you owe yourself a life that's worth living by your standards. Not what other people have to say or think about your life. Taking responsibility for things that you did in the past is important. Owning it, acknowledging it, dealing with the consequences of that, that's important. But all the judgment and all the bullshit that's going to get piled on your head because of it, yeah, screw that. Cults, by the way, always corrupt concepts around responsibility and blame and shame and guilt. 100% of the time. This is why when you come out of the cult, you not keep thinking like a cult member when it comes to this point of responsibility. In Scientology, for example, everything you ever did anywhere at any time for any reason is 100% your fault. Not true. You're not responsible for everything that was done to you. You're not even necessarily responsible for everything that you did. There's accidents. There's misunderstandings. There's all kinds of things that mitigate our responsibility. This is well understood by rational people. But responsibility and self-blame and guilt are some of the easiest buttons to push in people. So, of course, cult leaders are going to do that. And they're going to develop systems designed to trap you in your own sense of responsibility. And you're going to take the fall for all of their bullshit. Right? What all the cult leader wants and the cult leader's demands and the cult leader's needs are suddenly all your responsibility? How does that work? Well, it only works in a cult when you think like a cult member. So outside of that, you can just drop all that self-blame, self-guilt bullshit. And I know you can't just do it. I know that, okay? I believe me, I understand. It's not that easy. It's not a light switch. But I'm telling you, I'm offering you, a path here of don't do that to yourself. Don't make a habit out of that. That's what's important, okay? It's what you do moving into the future. It's what you do in the here and now and what you do into the future that people should be looking at. And like I said, what you do in the here and now is owning what you did, not denying it, not arguing about it, not, it's not bargaining with it, right? It's coming all the way around to acceptance. Okay. That happened. I did some shitty stuff. I sure did. I did all kinds of shitty stuff when I was a cult member. You think I'm beating myself up about it every day? Hell no. I've more than made up on any metric, on any scale you ever want to present in front and put in front of me. You want to judge me about, my cult behavior. Well, you better include the last 10 years of my anti-cult behavior too in that picture. Otherwise, you're just an asshole, right? And I don't see any reason why anybody should be listening to assholes, right? Judgmental, so ready to lay their judgments on you. But like I said, the number one way you know you're dealing with the assholes is the second you turn that mirror of judgment on them. Ho, ho, ho. How dare you? Who are you to judge me? Oh, the hypocrisy that you will encounter in the ex-cult community and in the big wide world in general, by the way, not just in the ex-cult world. Oh, rank levels of hypocrisy. It just, oh, it's smelly. It's just awful. So that's human beings being human beings. It's not just cult indoctrination that causes people to be judgy jerks, right? It's, you know, some people are just that way. In a cult, we were made to bend the knee to such people. Outside the cult, you are under no such obligation to do that. Okay, that's my list. I think those are the elements of cult recovery. I think that's a complete list, but I wanted to throw it out here for you guys to see what you guys thought. Go ahead and throw it in the comments. You know, we've been hearing from some stuff today in the live stream. It's been great. I really appreciate you guys watching and contributing to this stuff. And your comments about all this. Your feedback has been great. So this all being said, this is the basics of what I'm going to cover in Portland on Saturday. I'm going to go over this list and this stuff. So now you've gotten a preview of what I'm going to be talking about there. And I think moving forward, you're going to be hearing more about this stuff. I've told you that this year on my channel is the recovery year. I'm going to be focusing, I have been focusing for months now on this stuff. I'm going to continue doing that on this channel because I think that's how I am of most use and service to people at this point. I have, you know, shot my Scientology wad, so to speak, grossly. I have the metering video, and my plan right now is to come back from Portland, finish writing it, and get it produced. It's so close, but there have just been Portland and the MLM conference and getting sick and internet problems, and it's just been one thing after another trying to get this thing finished. So I'm down to the final bits, and so I'm thinking, you know, after I get back this weekend, next week, finish this thing off, get it wrapped up, and then I'm kind of done talking about and deconstructing Scientology as a topic. And I'm going to be focusing a lot of attention on this stuff across the cult spectrum, because I think everything I said here today, while I gave you guys an awful lot of Scientology examples, I think everything I said is 100% applicable to NXIVM survivors, to former evangelical extremists, to former radicalized Muslims, to domestic abuse survivors, to people who were trafficked. I think everything I said here today applies to all of that, all of those people. Ex-Moonies, ex-Mormons, all of them. So if you are of a mind to share this video, you know, for me in those communities, I'd really appreciate it. I don't see enough people talking about this stuff. There's no shortage of salacious, abusive drama and terrible stories about how people were raised and abused in cults. Those stories are out there in legion. How do you help those people? How do you move past this and stop dwelling on it and making it the central theme of your life? You recover from it and you move on and create a better life for yourself. And that's what I want to help people with. That's the only reason I'm doing this at this point, right? So I hope to continue doing that work. And I want to thank you guys for helping me with this. The MLM conference will be released on video soon. It is not on my channel, but the presentation I did was videoed. And so you guys will get to see it as soon as it drops, and I have a link. I will post it on my community tab on my channel, because I definitely do want you all to see what I had to say. And what the other, more than me, I want you guys to see what the other women in the anti-MLM community who are also recovering from all of this applies to them. They had so many insightful things to say about this topic, and I was so impressed by them. I'm going to definitely reach out and try to interview a couple of those women on this channel in this year. But as soon as that drops, I will get the link to that up for you guys. All right. So that all being said, let's go ahead and wrap up. Man, oh my God, this was a long talk. I'm definitely going to have to shorten this up for Portland. I've only got like an hour there. Thanks for helping me with this. I hope it was useful, informative, entertaining, and educational as always. And I hope that as a result of this, you will consider supporting my channel through Patreon, PayPal, whatever, and show me some love. I really could use it. I really could. That'd be great. And there we go. All right. Bye, guys.